Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the first of 4 Learn on Demand launch sessions for 2018. I'm going to be your host for the first session this morning, Corey Hynes. With me is my good friend,
you can't even say it.
I'm doing my best here, Brian. The one, the only Mr. Brian Bork.
Good morning.
Absolutely. So we're pretty excited to have everybody. We're have a lot to cover over the next couple of days. So 2 days of sessions. We'll go through the schedule. We'll go through the topics, the presenters, and kind of give you a preview of all the different things we're going to cover over the course of the next hour. So certainly glad you could join in live. And if you're watching the recording, you really should have come live because there's some fun things that are going to happen live. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, by the way, if you have questions, we're taking questions over Twitter.
That's right.
And so you can use the Twitter account, what is it, Learn on Demand, or LOD Systems.
That's right.
And then 2 hashtags, they should be popping up on your screen here shortly. One is hashtag labdeveloper and one is hashtag advdeveloper.
Or advanced.
Advanced developer. So labdeveloper, you're watching the first track. Labdeveloper, advanced developer, ADV developer, if you're watching the second track. And we'll be taking those live. Any questions that come in, we'll do our best to answer them. If we can't come up with a reasonably accurate sounding answer, or we can't make up something that sounds reasonable, we'll post it later in a blog post or something of the sort. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We'll take a look at the schedule for the next couple of days. So here's what we're looking at. We've got 2 fairly full days. We start at 10 o'clock each morning. The first hour this morning, we're going to take you through a couple of things in our opening session. Again, a highlight of sort of what we're working on, what some of the major focus areas you're going to hear about. So if you're wondering just kind of, what are we going to cover? What should you tune in for? Have a listen over the next about 30, 40 minutes, and you'll get a good sense of what the rest of the sessions are going to be about and get some previews into what we're working on for the next event in terms of major feature releases or capabilities. Following this, we have 2 tracks. We have a lab developer program, this is more introductory level. So if you're new to the platform, particularly new to building cloud-based labs on the platform, this is the path that you probably want to follow. It's going to get you all the information you need to build cloud labs, to build VM-based labs. The advanced developer program goes into a little more depth. So if you're looking at, hey, I know how to build labs, but I want to see the advanced stuff, things like how do I automate labs to talk to other platforms? How, maybe you've done a cloud slice lab already. How do you now do really custom templates so you can do really advanced cloud slice labs? If you've already played with some of our new Markdown-based authoring tools, you want to see some of the really cool things, the advanced things you can do when you combine Markdown and HTML, and also some of the lab replacement tokens, you can have a look at some of the sessions in that track. So that's, again, slightly more advanced, more detailed topics. And of course, all this is recorded. So if you miss something, or you want to do both, or you just tune out, or whatever the case is, this will all be posted following these recordings in the next couple of days. So you can always come back and take a look at it later. One of the things we're going to try to do is make sure that we chunk these things up into very small, very lightweight sort of sessions. So instead of watching an entire hour of content, you can pick the 10 or 15 or 5 minutes. That's the most relevant to you.
That's right. And those, both of those tracks are available through the website, and you will be able to get not only the live stuff, but also the carved up stuff that you mentioned.
Exactly. And then if you were joined us last summer, I think it was, when we did our first launch event, a lot of that information is also still relevant. So things like how you build virtual machines in the platform really hasn't changed. All that content's available as well. So everything you need to get started and go forward. Here's a look at our speaker list for the next 2 days. So we've got 6 speakers that we brought in for this event. Myself and Brian. Brian will be covering a lot of sessions over the next 2 days. We've brought in Kirk, who's our Director of Learning Services. Kirk focuses on building kind of new innovative POCs, solving those unique problems that are not as straightforward as you might think. And so he's got some really interesting lab scenarios he's going to showcase that are not what you might typically think of. When most people think of a traditional hands-on lab, they're thinking, a couple of virtual machines and a document. Right. But the reality is it's so much more than that. And so Kirk will show you some scenarios that, maybe you didn't think of these things, or maybe you didn't realize a lab could be that. We're also pretty excited. We've brought in Robert Lazecki. Robert's actually one of the developers that's built our entire Azure and now Amazon-based engine. So we've actually, believe it or not, we've brought in a legitimate developer, and we're going to put him on camera. We're not sure how this is going to go. I'm making no promises, but he did.
He completed his MCT this year,
did.
And his presentation skills are probably second to none at this point.
He's probably the best presenter here right now.
Probably.
Or he's a developer we're going to put on camera. We're going to find out which pretty soon.
Curly braces are important.
They are. They're extremely important. When you have Kirk, do we have a section with Kirk and Robert?
We do.
That'll be a very interesting debate over the positioning of curly braces.
That is correct.
That is what that'll be. We've brought in James, who runs our content team. And so what James essentially does is he's responsible for getting all the different labs that we have across all our customers brought online and working properly. That's the broad description of what he does. So he gets exposure to everything that customers are doing. So if you want kind of perspective on what folks are dealing with, he's the guy to have him in there. And then we've got joining us from Montreal, our good friend David Alfast, who focuses on testing. And so we're going to talk about some of the enhancements around performance-based testing. Now, there's a small chance that might wind up being me, because
that's right.
David had something pop up at the last minute. Is trying to arrange to make sure he can join us tomorrow. If he can't, then I may
pop in.
I may pop in and do my very best to sound like David.
Very good.
So,
can you do a Canadian accent?
I can do a Canadian. Well, he doesn't have a Canadian accent. He's got kind of a French Canadian accent. And if I try to do a French Canadian accent, I'm probably going to offend a lot of people. So we're not going to do that.
Okay, but now a lot of people don't know this, but you are actually from Canada.
I am actually Canadian, so I'm actually from Newfoundland, Canada. Originally.
But you have gotten rid of your.
Well, we'll leave that alone. Since we last met, I love statistics, I love numbers, but to give you some perspective on what we're doing in general. So in the last 12 months, I want to call it some interesting figures. If you're a facts and a figures kind of person, over 2 million lab launches in the last about 11-ish months. Of those now, and we'll clarify some of this terminology, we have the 1.2 million are what we call IDL launches. So these are labs that have integrated managed content, right? So much of what we've done has been, just virtual machines and a PDF.
Right.
Well, those days of, hey, throw up a virtual machine and throw up a document and call that good enough are behind us. And so what people want and what we're increasingly encouraging people to do is build things that are much more interactive, much more involved, much more robust. And so we brand those as IDL, interactive digital learning experiences. Mm-hmm. And so we've got a new set of tools, a whole new way of building this, so that this type of rich interactive hands-on training is something that is not only easy to build, but you want to build it because you get so much additional benefit. Virtual machines are still the bread and butter.
Yep.
They are going away. They will go away. They will get less and less and less. But they are still the bread and butter. Almost 8 million virtual machines in the last 12 months. Now, what they are being slowly replaced with is what we refer to as a cloud slice. Now, a cloud slice is a hands-on lab that uses no virtual machines. It's just web-based resources. So we've got documentation, and then we have resources that reside on the web. And the simplest and most common manifestation of this would be Azure access, right? So I want to log on to an Azure subscription, deploy, some things, whatever those, websites or databases or even virtual machines, storage, anything, and do my lab in that world, right? Where it's not, a piece of software running in an operating system. It's a slice of a cloud provider that provides me some service.
Right.
And so those are now the trend and now the thing that folks are beginning to build. And the reason that quite frankly, that these are becoming more and more common is because we've made this easy now. And so we'll see that as we work our way through.
The next number, the max concurrent labs, that number always impresses people. And I don't know if it's just me, but a lot of our customers have a tendency to ask, so I have 100 users that are going to be doing this. Can you handle that? And we point out the max concurrent labs, and that's not the maximum of what we're able to handle.
No, we operate at about 40%, 40 to 50% capacity at any given point in time. So 1,800 concurrent, almost 2,000 concurrent is, we don't even notice when that happens. We kind of go, oh, really? It's a busy day. We couldn't even tell because the platform just doesn't get bothered by it. And the same thing with the max concurrent VMs. Another sort of big one is public IP addresses issued. So many more labs now, if you look at the scenarios folks are building, they're hybrid scenarios. It's, I have some piece of cloud and some piece of on-premises technology. They need to talk to each other. And to do that, I need a public IP for the on-premises piece of technology. And so we've, in the last 12 months, really ramped up how we issue public IPs. And so now any lab at all, if you want a public IP, we can give it a public IP, which gives you inbound access to that environment. So you can, from the internet, i.e. from a cloud provider, hit the lab. Right. And you can actually connect the two together, and then when you're done, tear it all down again. We've made a big expansion. Again, like I had mentioned, virtual machines are on the decline. But at the same time, more and more countries are getting the connectivity to where they can use remote hosted. Right. And so what we're seeing is while they're kind of on the decline for, what I'll call the core IT training business, which is primarily in, kind of US and Western Europe, they're on the increase when you get out to, some of these other countries that maybe have not had the infrastructure. Right. So some of those countries, if you think, like South America, Africa, some Asia Pacific areas or Eastern Europe, they're now getting the infrastructure to the point where remote hosting of virtual machines is becoming normal and okay. Right. And so the result of that is we've got data centers now popping up all over the world. So we've got data center in Australia. We've got another one coming online in the next couple of weeks in the UK to service those areas. That's right. And then additionally to that point, what we're seeing is a trend that industries that are not IT. So if you think of IT as one vertical industry, right? Then we think of maybe like finance and healthcare is a big one. That in the healthcare world, they still walk around and install software with CDs on computers. They do, right? And so for them, moving to a hosted virtual machine model is it's light years ahead. You go in there. I'm going to channel my 9-year-old daughter Brooklyn. You go in there and you say virtual machines, and they kind of go, right? That's what she does. Whenever I tell her something interesting, she goes mind blown like this, or she goes very dramatic. Very dramatic. Yes. My older daughter just kind of looks at me and says, "Dad, really?" Wonder who she gets that from. Yeah, well. So in those verticals like healthcare, they're only now embracing virtual machines, right? So it's becoming, at the same time it's declining in the IT space, in other spaces it's starting to grow. Right. So we're finding that, having these additional locations certainly helps those customers. And then classes with labs, 20,000, that you might think, what? That's 20,000 like 5-day courses. Right. Run over the course of that period of time, which is a lot. That's literally hundreds a week that we're running. So scale, no issue. Scale's fun. Scale is good. Now, who are the companies that are doing this? This is this slide. This is a snapshot of we've got over 500 companies that use this platform. These are some of the larger, more interesting, more recognizable ones. I'm not, by any means disparaging anyone who's not on this list, but for example, recently Nutanix came on board, and we can now provide all their hosted labs for anyone that's doing Nutanix training. Same thing with Veeam, with Citrix. Microsoft just grow. Microsoft is one of those ones that is moving more cloud centric, right? Less focused on virtual machines. And so, a lot of interesting companies in here bringing forward interesting scenarios. One of the things that, if you look real close, you start to see more security-focused companies, which is a result of cyber range. Yes. And so we're going to talk about shared labs a little bit here, and we have a session on cyber range and shared labs that today, right after this one. Right after this one, yep. In the other room with you and James. Awesome. Yep. So if you're interested in this whole notion of a shared lab environment, we'll preview it in here, and then they'll go deep into it in the next session. Few more little kind of data points. This is an interesting one. This is lab launches that are 100% Azure-based with no virtual machines involved whatsoever. If you look, the big spike in November last year, we did a big kind of proof of concept pilot event with a couple of hundred students that were running labs for a couple of days, purely in cloud. We're going to be releasing a case study on that. I saw the preview of it last night, showing how for that lab delivery that they did, we cut their student startup time from 30 minutes to about 30 seconds. Right. And we cut their delivery cost by 97%.
Isn't that amazing?
97% delivery cost reduction by using this all Azure, no VMs delivery model.
Yep.
Now, again, limitations with it, obviously.
Right.
Nothing's perfect, but they were doing traditional Azure IT Pro stuff,
Right.
deploying compute, deploying storage, deploying networking, doing automation. So this is, mainstream content. So it's absolutely fantastic. And then here's another sort of interesting one that's the counterpoint to this. You see, after we did the pilot, we did a major push to release it. And then from December through to now, what you're seeing is customers start to ramp this up. And this is only going to grow. So, over 2,500 of these labs done just in the month of March. Have a look at virtual machine-based lab launches. You can see they start to get a little bit on the decline. Now, some of this is natural. If you look at, January of last year, January this year is actually about the same and going up. February is is a little bit lower. But what you're seeing is this slow conversion away from, labs where, I'm going to have a VM. That's what I'm going to have.
Right.
To there's other things. There's other options. There's maybe better ways of doing this that are faster, cheaper, easier.
And some of those customer companies that we had up are starting to use and get involved with the Cloud Slice. So they're actually rewriting their courseware to look at how you can use cloud slicing.
So our goal with this event is kind of put creators first, right? If you're a content creator, you're a subject matter expert. Our goal as a platform and as a company is to put your needs first. We wanted to make it easy to build and deliver content, because if it's easy to build and create, the content's going to be better because it takes less time, less effort, easier to fix, easier to maintain. And so that's, if you look at a theme of what all this is about, this is the theme. Now,
that's not complicated.
It's actually not. And this is, I will be brutally honest, this is the extent of my ability with PowerPoint.
You did a good job.
Pastel colors and squares.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I'm
pretty.
And shadows.
I noticed the shadows.
Shadows are good. So this is, if you want to kind of think about what we do as a whole, right? I've broken our platform and everything we do into 4 areas. We have consume, manage, build, and deliver. So I'm going to start on the bottom and kind of work my way up. So if you look at deliver is, where can you put content so that people can consume it? And in the past, it's, well, you throw it in a data center on Hyper-V or VMware.
Right.
Now it's a lot broader. Now it can be, a data center on VMware or Hyper-V, but it could also be in a data center in Azure or in Amazon, right? It could be in Office 365. It could be any web-based portal. Kirk's going to do a demo with a web-based service where they build a bunch of labs around it. And in fact, I'll give you kind of a simple example here. Need to jump down here and here.
Look at that.
And so I'm going to launch a lab that is, there we go. That's maybe a little bit different. This is a lab that's 100% based on a web-based service. This is a lab on how to do quantum computing using IBM's quantum simulator. There's no virtual machines. There's no cloud providers. There's no Azure. It's a free web-based tool that does quantum emulation, and we wrote a lab around it.
Do you remember when we got together and did a hackathon?
I do.
Our entire company did a hackathon and learned about doing this. And I remember, I got to give a shout out to Quinn, the guy who was here last year delivering and still with us. Quinn did a parachuting. Do you remember a parachuting lab?
He did a lab.
It was completely web-based.
No, he did a lab on how to save yourself when your parachute fails.
Because it did.
Because it did. His parachute failed, and he saved himself, which is why he's still with us.
Right.
Otherwise, this would be a very sad conversation.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have brought it up then.
So,
but this is amazing.
Yeah.
It really is.
So anything you can think of, if it's on the web, you can write a lab on it, and the tool lends itself to that. It's no longer a wrapper for a virtual machine.
Exactly.
It's now a wrapper for your imagination.
And the instructions, a lot of people think, well, a lab is just the virtual machines, but it's not. It's the components, like your slide. It is build, manage, and deliver. I forgot the fourth one.
So we're going to come back here, right? So
create.
Create. And then so we have something we're going to talk about shortly called an Azure Virtual Data Center, right? Which
amazing.
Is, it's a copy of our data center as a template in Azure. We'll get into that. So then you create things, right? So you can deliver any of those things. Well, what can you need to create things to deliver. What can you create? This is a sample of the things that you can create. templates, policies, labs, assessments, documents, scripts, slices, classes, courses. I mean, the list of things you can create goes on and on and on. One of my favorite here is inclusions, which is we were trying to come up with a word that described the fact that you could pull in anything from the web,
Right.
and just make it part of your lab environment. And some things are a managed experience, like Azure and Amazon capacity, right. And some things are just, hey, it's a website, right? You could write a lab on your company HR portal.
Exactly.
In fact, we extended the help for our platform using this exact same model. So when you're in our platform now, I split these into multiple desktops to make it easier, and it's actually not easier. And you go to the help in our platform.
I love this.
Right?
I really do.
Our help is a lab. So we've taken the exact same engine we use to deliver labs, and we use it to provide inline context-sensitive help. And you'll notice that, I'm going to zoom this way in for a second. The help knows who I am, right? And it's able to tailor and customize what I see based on my roles and what I have access to, and give me direct access to things I own. So rather than doing things like go find your lab profile, it can say, here's the link to your lab profile.
Exactly.
And it can know who you are and what you have access to. So this notion of it being more than a wrapper for a VM, it can be anything, right? Our help is a lab.
It is. And personalization helps the learners.
Yep.
If you make a learner feel like they are a main component of their environment.
So then we move on to this consume layer, right? So, okay, you've built content, you put it on a fabric. How do you turn around and get access to it? And you've got three fundamental ways. We have a browser-based experience, right? So any web browser, it can be on your phone, right? It can be on a tablet. It can be anything that has a compliant browser. We have an experience built for that. But then you can also integrate with external systems. So, for example, LTI.
Right.
Very common if you have an LMS platform where you have training and you want to add lab capacity. LTI gives you a sort of an industry standard hook to be able to surface our experiences in whatever that platform is. Kirk and someone do a session on that. Kirk and Robert do a session on that tomorrow, correct? Yes.
I believe it's tomorrow, yes.
You're supposed to have the schedule memorized?
I don't.
That was your job.
You have one job.
You have one job. Memorize the schedule. Oh, God. Incidentally, we have some job openings at Learn.
And a brand new one.
Brand new one. Schedule memorizer.
Actually, it is important to mention that we are always looking for people, and they should go to the website to
Absolutely.
check that.
Always looking for good, smart people.
That's right.
We have hired, I think, 14 people in the last couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
So growing, absolutely. Then we have our API. So we have our own API that lets you do some really interesting custom things. And then you authenticate, right? And so authentication is any one of sort of the industry standard authentication providers. Azure Active Directory, Google, Microsoft account, or our own internal authentication engine. Then you manage it. And so we have all our management tools via a browser. One thing worth mentioning, we'll talk about this briefly towards the end, is we're in the next 12 months completely overhauling the management experience so that it's one central portal using much wizard-based tools and an easier to use layout so that it becomes even more self-service. My challenge to our development team is if a customer has to call our support line for something, we have failed them. It should be 100% sort of self-service, easy to use, intuitive. You shouldn't need to call us for anything. We should be there in the background, keeping the lights turned on, nothing else. If you need us to help you, we've got a gap we need to fill. And then you can, of course, manage via PowerShell. We've got a PowerShell module that does some common, repetitive lab tasks. And also our API as well that provides a lot of management capabilities. You can build your own tools if you're heavily invested here. So that's the platform as a whole, right? It's a lot there.
There is a lot there.
And this, of course, it's spread across two major systems, our training management system and our lab on demand system. So with that, we'll move on to talk about some of the new things that we want people to be focused on. So the first one is a term we're calling IDLX.
X. For extra special.
Extra special. And
or
so
experience.
So this is our integrated, is it interactive digital learning? We need to do a survey.
We do, on what it should mean.
What it should mean.
Interactive digital learning is what we have agreed upon in the past.
Okay. In the past? I don't know if I like that, though.
Oh, now you're going to change it.
I like integrated digital lab.
Okay. But it's more than just a lab. It's about a learning experience.
I did a lab.
I did a lab. That's nice.
So,
there you go.
This is when we debate internally a lot, and in public.
Apparently, and in public as well.
So it's a modern experience for modern labs, and so if you will see this begin to roll out. If you're taking labs on our platform, if you've done a cloud slice like an Azure-based lab, you've seen this already. But for all our traditional virtual machine-based labs, this new UI is rolling out as we speak.
It is.
And so I want to take a second and show you what it looks like. So we've got two of these. So here's an example of this UI running in a virtual machine. So we've got it's a traditional virtual machine layout. We've got the virtual machine on the side, but the instructions are now more in a free-form document format over here, right? So it looks much more like a document. The idea here is that we give the authors all the creativity all the flexibility they need to be creative.
Right.
So you can do anything you want in this document layout. And it is intelligent. So for example, you can check boxes to track progress, and on the back end, it will report that. You've got the ability to page things. So we've got this next and previous on the bottom where you can move back and forth between pages. You've got the ability to zoom natively within the window, depending on what your resolution is. You've got a number of themes that you can choose from, right? Depending on just what you prefer and what you prefer to see.
Do you prefer the dark background?
I tend to prefer the dark background to the light background, just my personal preference.
That's because you're a programmer. All the developers use that dark background. I use the light one.
That's probably true. But then at the same time, all the stuff you're used to is still there. It's a simpler UI. The idea here, though, is not to change the UI. It's to give the authors of the content much more flexibility in what they build. For non-VM based labs, I'm going to fire up one of those here. I've got one kicking around here somewhere. Here it is right here. Here's an example of a lab that's based on strictly cloud technologies. So we launch it, and now the experience is a little bit different. There's actually no virtual machines in this lab at all. So it's strictly using Azure resources. Actually, that's a lie. There are virtual machines, but the virtual machines are not where you do your work. There's simply things you leverage as you complete the lab. So this one spins up. We go get started. It actually now gives me two browser windows, one of them being the lab manual, and the other being a portal of a website of some type. In this case, it's the Azure portal. And so as I go through, I get some very interactive instructions. So I've got some notifications popping up here, and then I've got some very interactive instructions. I'm going to just adjust the zoom on this just a little bit. I'm going to use some of the Windows docking features here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, not quite that much. And what you can see right here is the instructions are customized to me, right? So it says, hey, log on as. It doesn't say your user account. It says this guy. And that's a completely, you can click to copy it, come down here, paste it in, right? And it eliminates error. So you can focus on the tasks, not trying to work your way through the instructions. And so you'll notice that it also knows if I deploy something in a cloud, this thing right here, it knows exactly what it was called. Mm-hmm. And if I click forward a couple of pages, I believe it's this page right here, and scroll down, it can even do custom PowerShell. So for example, here's a PowerShell command that uses an Azure subscription, but the command itself is already customized to what my exact environment is, including knowing things like my Azure subscription ID.
And then you can copy that.
Yep.
And then paste it directly in.
Exactly. Right. So running these commands makes it eliminates all the silly errors that are blockers to learning.
That's correct.
Things like, oh, I typoed my subscription ID, or what's my username? I don't remember my username. Everything now, it's 100% session aware. It's fully custom. It's fully available to you.
We've always, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
We've always said that whatever we can do, and you mentioned putting creators first, but the creator is thinking about how do I make the student experience better? And you and I have had this talk many times. We're not teaching typing classes.
Correct.
Not that we couldn't, but we're designed here to help them. So PowerShell commands and code snippets and things like that, having that right there to
exactly.
copy.
You don't want someone to fail because they make a typo in something.
Exactly.
Right? You want to make it sort of a realistic experience and give them, the biggest opportunity to succeed. And so this is part of this new authoring cycle that we'll talk about as we go through. We call it IDL-MD. That actually is a good segue into just that. So what I'm showing you there in this previous lab is this notion of what we call a cloud slice, right? And a cloud slice is a piece of a cloud provider. And we use the term transient access, right? Which is, we had a big debate over this because if you look up, the transient in the dictionary, it's either, kind of a homeless guy that turns up and then disappears again, or, it's temporary short-term. And so this is temporary short-term access to a cloud provider without any overhead whatsoever. So if I go back to that lab that I just started up, it's giving me my credential to use, right? Mm-hmm. It's giving me the password to use. I didn't have to sign up for anything.
Right.
There we go. There's the password right there. I didn't have to paste that in. I didn't have to sign up for anything. I didn't have to use an Azure Pass. Didn't have to create an account. The lab generates this level of access for me, places me in the cloud provider, and potentially populates my cloud provider with things that I need to complete my lab. So in this case right here, I've got an Azure subscription that's just full of stuff, mm-hmm. right? And I know that's not a very good technical term, but you can see right here, it's full of stuff. It's full of, it's when you create a virtual machine for a lab, typically you don't just say, here's an empty VM.
Right.
You configure it because you want to, I want you to build users in a domain. Well, I give you a domain and I put the tools in, right? I want you to configure a database. I install SQL Server and now you're at the right starting point. This is the same notion. Building a cloud slice is, comparable to building a virtual machine and installing software.
Except they're not VMs.
They're not VMs.
Well,
right?
they could be.
Yeah, like for example, like some of the things I've deployed are virtual machines, right? You're meant to configure these virtual machines. But the virtual machine is the topic, not the delivery vehicle.
Exactly.
So that's the notion of cloud slice. And we have this today full production for Azure, and it is in flight for Amazon right now. So this is what we're working on in the background for Amazon. Speaking of that, I'm going to just detour for one quick second because I do want to show you something about that here in a second. But I want to start a lab in the background so we come back to it. So
I think that's my cue to say something, except I don't have anything good to say.
No, you're fine. So we're going to flick back here.
By the way, don't forget, if you're coming in live, you can reach us in Twitter with your questions, and that information is available on the feed. So make sure you double check that.
So Carnegie, who is a good friend of ours, is asking on Twitter, what does IDLX mean? Welcome to 10 minutes ago when we argued about this, Carnegie. We're not sure. We're looking for you to suggest what it means.
That's right. Post it inside of Twitter. Tell us what you think IDLX means.
It's the big, what should it mean?
That's right. Instead of where's Waldo, what does IDLX mean?
I know. So one of the things we've done is, so we've made access to cloud easier, but how do we make it easy to access lab documents, right? How do we make it easier to author lab documents? In the past, we had a kind of a form-based, setup where you type all these different, and it took a long time. For someone to take a Word document and make that a lab manual, you take a typical 5-day course, mm-hmm. It was taking 3-4 weeks just to convert it.
Right.
Now we do that in 3-4 hours. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that we've migrated all the lab manual authoring to Markdown. And so if you're not familiar with Markdown, we've got some sessions that talk about this, what it is and whatnot. But Markdown is essentially a text-based language that uses very simple markup syntax within text to create formatting. So think about HTML, if you're familiar with HTML. And what this looks like, if I go back to my lab instance for a second, I may need to go check this out. So we're going to slide this one out of the way here. So I'm going to go back to my cloud slice. If I come over here and I get this edit instructions option, now what I get is a live lab editor. And so what I've got over on this side of the page here, I'm trying to zoom this in a bit. Can I zoom this? Oh, shift. There we go. How do I zoom this page?
I think you have to...
Oh, I do it up here.
Yep, there you go.
There we go. There we go. That's a little better. So what I have over here is a Markdown editor. And so if I look at, I go to my first page of my lab. There we go.
Yep.
So lab overview, my objectives, and this is literally something I can type in.
Real time.
And it's all done 100% real time, including the formatting. For example, bold is a couple of asterisks. And you can do all sorts of creative things. If I just scroll down through this Markdown, you can see, it's a very human readable format.
Right.
It's not difficult. If you've ever worked in things like GitHub, this is very familiar to you. And additionally, there are tools out there that can take a Word document and just spit out Markdown.
Again, in a session.
We're going to cover that in a session. So we kind of scroll down through and you can see, this is all the Markdown that makes up this lab manual. The pages, by the way, are just these triple equal signs is what makes a page. Right? Very simple syntax, and we've included help on how you do all of this.
This is, as somebody who does quite a bit of documentation and help creation, this help is one of the best helps that we have.
Absolutely.
Our help system is getting great.
Yep.
This is
so this is all here. And so you want to know how to do it. It's a click away. And on top of that, the interactivity is incredibly simple. So for example, here's my first page, and we've included what we're calling lab tokens. And so all I've got to do is type lab dot, and I now have access to knowledge about the lab that I'm running, right? So for example, I want to put my email address in there for the user. If the system knows the email address as part of the user account,
right.
All I've got to come down here and just kind of scroll my way down through is all these different parameters.
And as you get more efficient,
user email.
There you go.
And you'll notice that it pulls my email address right into the lab manual. So
your actual email.
Yeah. So that's how you build these dynamic documents, right? One of the simple examples I like to do is, hey, I want to do a dynamic PowerShell command. So we've got 3 little ticks, 3 more little ticks, and I create a little code block. Right, that's written in PowerShell and labeled as such. And now what I put in here is very simple. It's fully formatted, copyable PowerShell code. And this is not correct PowerShell. Kirk's out in the back right now screaming at us.
Don't do that.
Where lab dot, where service equals.
Come to launch 2018, quarter 1. Watch Corey type.
Exactly. So you can see this PowerShell command it generated. It's no longer, customize a template PowerShell command. It's the exact PowerShell command you need to run because it's based on things like your lab instance ID, for example. And you're going to learn how when you deploy things in cloud, you can leverage this knowledge of the environment to build completely custom so that the lab environment 100% matches the lab manual at all times. And there's never this confusion that happens.
That's right.
And so we'll get into, in some of those other sessions, some of this stuff. But the other thing that worth mentioning on this is companies like Amazon and Microsoft, their documentation is written in Markdown.
That's right.
So you can literally go to their documentation. If there's a procedure you need, copy paste, and you've now written a lab manual. You guys will be showing that in some of the sessions.
Yes, we will. And I think it's important to mention that not only is this available for Cloud Slice, but as you can show here, it's available for virtualization as well.
Right.
Not that you want to promote that, but it's available.
This is one we're excited about. We now have support for AWS as a hosting fabric. So you can run your lab virtual machines on Amazon. And in fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right here. This is a lab virtual machine. It's just a regular old lab, but the virtual machine itself is running on Amazon's their Northern Virginia data center. So if you're looking at, hey, I need to do a delivery, I need virtual machine-based labs, but I need it in some region of the world where maybe we can't reach, and by the way, I use Amazon for everything. Guess what? We can do that.
We can do
so
that.
We can deploy massive scale virtual machines natively on Amazon now. And by the way, their documentation is Markdown.
That's right.
So you can pull this lab manual right here is literally Amazon documentation, copy paste it, and you'll notice it even picks up all the typing, the formatting, the structure, brings in the graphics, everything. Right, literally copy paste. That's all I did. Copy paste some documentation from Amazon GitHub repo.
It's almost like we know what we're doing.
Almost. We have a session coming up on Linux in a little bit.
Yep.
And so one of the things we spent a lot of time on is making Linux better. And there's 2 scenarios for this. I'm not going to show these right now. I want to let Kirk show them in his session. One of them is called the Linux Enhanced Session Mode, which is Windows equivalency user experience for Linux. In the past, Linux has been difficult. It's getting a lot better. We'll show that. And then also, if you're in a world where you're just working in Linux console sessions, how do you deploy Linux on Azure and just give someone a console directly into it, right? So no Azure portal, just I've deployed Linux in Azure and here's an SSH session.
Right.
Connect to your VM. And the manual knows what your VM is. So we'll go through that. Then we have this notion of shared labs. So you've got the session on this next.
Yes.
But to kind of preview what we're talking about here, shared labs. So Brian, while I grab this, what is a shared lab?
This is, it's whatever your mind wants it to be. It's sort of like the Imaginarium or whatever. But the primary functionality of a shared lab is the ability for multiple students to be able to contribute or potentially fight against each other in a space where there is a central shared environment and then the participants. If you want to refresh that just one time, you'll notice that we have a...
I've got two.
You got two. I think I may have accidentally...
Yours timed out.
Mine timed out.
So in this example right here, what we have is one lab, which is the instructor's lab. And instead of the students being isolated, the student lab instances can actually talk to the instructor's lab instance.
That's right.
So the instructor can now set up things like shared resources that the students can connect to, leverage, use, maybe even attack.
That's correct.
Right. So we'll talk about some of the use cases in Brian's session, but as an example, let's say that we're one of the big use cases is cyber range, right, for cybersecurity. And a lot of the customers that we've added, they're using shared labs to build cyber range. The idea is that I have this shared environment, and then I've got a classroom full of students, and they all attack it, and whoever takes it down wins. Or maybe I've got a little network set up. It's got firewalls and databases and websites, and the right half of the room, their job is to defend it. The left half, their job is to take it down. Exactly. And they all work in real time on the exact same environment.
And it launches that central environment automatically.
Yep.
And if it's a group of people, one person can get everything started, and a second person can join, and a third person can join, and you have no limit on the types of participants that you can use.
Exactly. We then have what we call our Azure Virtual Data Center. Now, I'm going to start this lab. This one takes it a little bit to spin up. I meant to start it earlier, but honestly, I got carried away and excited with the IDL stuff, and I kind of forgot.
And I have to say that the first time I saw the Virtual Data Center, it was mind-blowing. And it was totally off the cuff. And you have to think about the usage case here. The concept of being able to spin up a LOD instance anywhere.
So what's happening here is this is a normal, average, there's nothing special about this lab, right? This is just it's a virtual machine-based lab. It's the same lab we've delivered for, the last 15 years. The difference is the Hyper-V host that is hosting this lab is a Hyper-V host that's running as an Azure virtual machine, right? So what we've essentially done is we've taken our entire data center model and we've created an Azure template for it. And we can now go to any Azure data center worldwide and we can deploy that template. What that gives us is an instance of our data center in any Azure data center. So let's take China, right? Doing labs from China is difficult because latency is just awful. If we needed to deliver a major event in China, we could spin up a data center in China for 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, a year, run it on Azure hardware using Azure nested virtualization and deliver labs natively in that data center. And it looks like the screen's black, which it will actually come to life. This takes a little bit because we're running this on a fairly low-powered sort of prototype proof of concept that we keep running while we build this. Stuff's expensive.
It is.
I'm not going to lie. So we don't keep massive hardware. I'm going to leave this and we'll come back to it here in a little bit and you'll see that this is just a regular old virtual machine. And maybe I just refresh it real quick. There we go.
There it is.
So now this is a virtual machine that's running, works just like every other virtual machine, with the exception that this is now in and running actually on hardware that's hosted in Azure. So it's our software on Azure virtual machines. So I love this. This is fun. We can now, endless different use cases for this. The guys are doing a platform session tomorrow. Brian, you had one job.
I have it right here.
Where is it?
Which session are you talking about?
This is the platform choice session.
The platform choice session, which is coming up on this afternoon at 2:30. It's introduction to... Nope, I picked the wrong one. It's at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
There you go. Choosing the lab platform, Hyper-V, and that is with James and Robert.
And so what they're talking about is VMware, Hyper-V, Azure, Amazon, Azure Virtual Data Center. which one? What's the best choice? What's the scenarios for each one of those?
Exactly.
So that's a fun one. We love this one. This is one of my personal favorites. The cool thing about this little behind-the-scenes tip is we wrote no code to make this happen.
I know.
It's purely an infrastructure project. I gave this to our data center guys and said, build me a data center in Azure that I can deploy with a template, and they did it. So it's absolutely fantastic.
By the way, I just want to give a shout out back to Carnegie. She mentioned cloud slicing.
That's awesome. Good job, Carnegie. He's our new best friend. So that's some of the cool things we've built. Where are we making the investments, right? So we're doing very well as a company. We're continuing to grow. We have a wonderful, wonderful group of very loyal customers. What are we turning around and doing, and where are we investing the revenue that we make to build the platform and make it better? Now, so I want to share some of the strategic direction that we're taking on that front. The first one is our events business. Contrary to popular opinion, and contrary to things I've been saying for the last 5 years, more and more companies are doing large-scale conferences and events. And I've changed my thinking. Originally, I was thinking, why would people do this? Because everything is going virtual. And the reality is, because everything is virtual, these events, social networking activities are now becoming things that folks rely on more and more because they don't get to the classes.
That's right.
And so the value of in-person conferences where you do ILLs and lab rooms is going up, and more companies are starting to do this. So we're building a lot of tools to make this sort of deployment simpler and easier to use. And so we've got an entire events engine. I'm going to pull up a couple of pages here just very briefly. Let me flick back to where I am, where I've got there we are right there. So here's an example. It's a little bit behind the scenes, right, of what we do to manage events. This is an events page. You wouldn't ordinarily see this. This is what our administrators see. But we've got things like an event homepage. This is a fully customizable page that can have achievements, that can have graphics, that can have a wonderful look and feel. You can have sorting, filtering of all your content. Then if you're doing instructor-led activities, go back one here, we can actually even define rooms. And then the list of labs you see in that rooms automatically changes based on a schedule. So when someone goes in that room, they can only ever do the right thing.
That's right.
And then everything can have customized sorting, filtering, can have tags so that it's easy to find. We can add achievements so that if you complete, for example, 10 labs on cloud, you get the parachute badge. So there's a lot of fun things we're investing to make this event experience a whole lot better. On the infrastructure side of things, we've done a lot of work that, timeless or, painless or tireless. That's the word, tireless.
I wouldn't say painless.
It wasn't painless, it wasn't timeless. It took a lot of time and a lot of pain. These guys suffered tirelessly.
Tirelessly.
To really make a lot of changes behind the scenes within the data centers. The way we do web access is completely overhauled. Very robust, very rich, very customizable. We've even got the ability to do blacklisting and whitelisting to avoid things like Bitcoin mining, which is something we've dealt with in the last year.
Yeah.
Replication between data centers, massive upgrades to links, automatic storage loading. One of the cool things we've built now is geosensing, so that we can figure out where you are in the world based on your IP and route you to the right data center. So if your content is replicated to many places, you'll always go to the closest copy of your content.
Which isn't always the geographically closest.
No, it's based on latency.
Yeah, South Africa is a perfect perfect example, because we assumed that because they were geographically closer to Australia, that would make sense. But in actuality, they were actually closer to...
The South Africans and the Australians don't like each other because of rugby. So they route the lines that way on purpose. Yeah, it could be. And India, for example, India is latency-wise far closer to the UK than any other place in the world.
Yep.
So, some interesting things we've learned through that process. So here's some examples of what our global network looks like now. We've got 4 data center locations with replication between them. The Tulsa data center locations are moving to Seattle, by the way. You didn't know that, did you?
I didn't.
No, that's later on this year. Those are moving to Seattle. So we're standardizing on some of the back-end infrastructure pieces so that we get these better connections. And so they're going to...
This is why we do keynotes.
It is.
So that you and I can actually talk and tell people what's coming.
So you can learn what's going on. So we haven't announced that to anyone yet, though, so don't tell anyone.
Okay, I'll make sure I don't tell the entire world via a keynote speak at launch.
Yeah, that's strictly confidential.
Okay.
Employees only. So if you're not an employee, don't ignore that.
Yeah, please ignore.
Managed mock. This is a program we put in place last year. So from, again, Microsoft official curriculum is still one of the largest sources of content that we deliver. And that's not going to go away. Microsoft are continuing to build more and more courses, continuing to invest in instructor-led. And so we want to make that better. And so managed mock is Microsoft official curriculum that has an assigned, what's the term we use? Is it a SME or a...
SME, a subject matter expert.
Yeah, so we have assigned a subject matter expert to that course. Their job is to be on top of the changes. So if you think about Azure-based mock, if there's a change in Azure, they know about it and they do updates on the weekend. So it's a paid position that we have where these folks constantly work on this content to always make sure it's current. So this managed mock, there is no mock that is going to be as accurate as this particular program. Right now, I believe there's 20 courses in this program.
When we first started, there were 5.
Yep.
And it is only growing. And we actually believe that it's possible that this will end up being the main program with our system, not...
Exactly. Not just something we're doing for special courses.
Right.
Again, maintained on GitHub, maintained in Markdown. The instructors get very quick access to make simple changes to always make sure that it's current. So it's a fantastic program. Self-service is a big space. Now, you haven't seen a lot of this yet as a customer, but we've done a lot of work behind the scenes. And what you're going to see in the next coming months is us beginning to build new portals and new tools so that you can do more for yourself.
Right.
Where you can see this now is within Cloud Slice and Markdown. It is now much easier to build a lab. Right. Where we're now focused on is much easier to create, build, and schedule courses. Even go so far as make it easy to sell content. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So a big theme moving into the rest of this year is self-service. As I said, my challenge to our development team is if a customer has to call us to do something for them, we have a gap we need to fill. Right. And so our goal is identifying and filling those gaps. And certainly if you're a customer, feedback on this. What are the things that you have to ask us to do? And we'll automate those things so you can do it for yourself. So what are we focused on next, right? So that's what we're looking at now. Down the road, right? So let's kind of fast forward even further. As a company, where are we strategically placing our bets? Well, the first one is more cloud, right? Cloud is prolific. Cloud is everywhere. We want to extend what we can do with cloud. And so here's some examples, right? What if a lab could be Amazon, Google, and Azure all at the same time, right? No longer a single platform, but multi-platform. I want you to do a lab where you can deploy a storage account on Amazon, Google, and Azure all in the same lab. Where I can deploy a virtual machine in Azure, but use authentication on Google and storage on Amazon to build a hybrid scenario. Where I can have a VM in a data center paired with a VM hosted on Amazon using storage hosted on Azure. I don't even know that's a valid, but you get the idea.
Right.
Where we can do all the stuff you're going to see with why do they both start with A?
I don't know.
With Azure here, we're doing the same thing with Amazon. So transient slice-based access, where you can target your own region and you can even use your own subscription. So rather than using our subscription, you can bring your own.
Before you move forward, we got an excellent question from the Peanut Gallery. And Jim, you asked the question, and I'm going to repeat it here, about is it better to have a virtual machine that has all of the components that are required? For example, Visual Studio is an excellent choice. To deploy a virtual machine that has that and then connect to the Azure resources, or just make the Azure resources available. And I personally want to take a second to
go for it
to address that. Jim, first of all, we're going to be talking about that throughout the sessions about cloud slicing. But the actual answer to your question is that right now it is possible to build a template of a virtual machine in Azure and run all of your Azure stuff inside of that virtual machine.
Yep.
And we're actually doing that for a pilot project right now.
Perfect. Awesome. So you really got like 3 possible ways you can do that. You can tell the students, hey, install these tools before you turn up to class.
Right.
You can say, hey, I'm going to give you a VM in one of our data centers with all these tools in it, and you'll use that in your class. Or you can say, I'm going to deploy you a VM in Azure with all the tools in it, and use that in your class.
Exactly.
And the answer is, there's no right answer. They've all got kind of pros and cons, right? Getting the students to install the tools may work, may not. Students, using a VM in our data center Now you've got to look at, okay, how do I get connected to your data center and the requirements that go into that?
Right.
Putting it in a VM in Azure, now I'm looking at the cost of running a VM.
Exactly.
So there's trade-offs to all these different scenarios.
Excellent.
Another area that we're spending a great amount of time is what we used to call PBT, but now we're calling activity-based assessment. So activity-based assessment is the next evolution of scoring a lab, right? For whether or not it's, for testing purposes, for assessment purposes, for learning, for whatever you might think of. And so some of the things we're working on in this conditional progress, you cannot go to exercise 3 until exercise 2 is complete and correct.
Yep.
And we'll score exercise 2, and if you're blocked, we'll let you try it again. If you're blocked, if you don't get it, we'll let you try it again. If you fail 3 times, you're done, get out. Right? Now, these are things that are possible, or not hard and fast rules.
Right.
What if you could say, I'm going to get to the end of exercise 2, you have to answer 2 multiple choice questions, and I'm going to check to see if you created that object. And you must do all 3 of these things. You got to answer the 2 theory questions, and you have to have created the object. Right? So what's your rationale, and did you do it?
Right.
You can score multiple platforms at the same time. You need to create a storage account on Azure, Amazon, and Google, and I'll score all 3 at the same time. And then you can write scoring rules that are session aware. So I know about your specific session, and I can look for the things that relate to your session. So at that point, you no longer have to tell the user, create a username Bob, and rely on them not to name them Robert. You can actually say create a username, and you can put the actual string value there. They can copy paste it. So these are some of the things. The list, by the way, is about 4 pages.
Right.
But these are some of the highlights, and this whole notion of being able to score in different scenarios on different platforms, not just do a bunch of stuff and then at the end you get a score, but making it a part of your progression through a learning experience.
I'm very disappointed in you.
Why?
You couldn't put another B in there?
Be aware.
Well, it's called activity-based assessment. If
Well,
you put another B in there, you got ABBA.
Fair, true enough. So,
Although I'm still going to call it that.
wizards. So, for example, what if you have a lab conversion wizard for cloud? So I have a cloud environment, I go convert to lab, and it just does everything. Right now, it's a bit of a manual process, right? What if it's 1 or 2 clicks? I go, here's the resource group, convert to lab, and it does it all for you. What if you go to create a cloud lab and it gives you a list of templates, right? Here's a cloud lab that here's the 10 most common cloud lab configurations: VM and a storage account, Linux box and a shell. And that's all you need. We give you all these templates. And then what if you had one portal that managed all of that? Instead of going into Lab on Demand and having all these different boxes you can click on, what if it was a wizard-driven, experience-driven portal that governed everything you do? And so we're actually working on that, building this one overarching central portal that we're hoping to be able to show you in about 3 months, maybe? Maybe a prototype?
Maybe
hopefully.
the next launch.
And then what if we could give you the tools to sell your own content? So you come in here and you build a lab on Amazon or Azure. How do you turn around and give that to customers? Well, what if we gave you a marketplace where you could put that lab, you could put a price on it, and someone could come in, browse your marketplace, purchase access to your lab, consume it, and then we send you a check at the end of the month for the 20 people that took your lab. Right? You charge $10 for it, and we send you a check for whatever it is minus a markup. Think of iTunes or an app store for lab content. And so we have that right now. We have a prototype of it built. It's a major initiative we're working on this year, and then we're hoping to be able to show you in the next couple of months so that you can go in, build some content, and then turn around and we'll produce a URL you can put in your blog and say, hey, here's all the stuff I've built. Go here to buy access to it. And then we can now turn around, because it's within the ecosystem of all these companies, all these training companies. Now, if some of these major global training providers want to make your content part of their custom classes, it's just a matter of them going in, searching, clicking a few buttons, and it's done. So you now have a pipeline into the global training delivery ecosystem. So what if we did that for you? That'd be
awesome.
That'd be awesome. And so we're building that. And this this whole notion of you can build an entire business around people do it with YouTube videos, right? I make a living because I produce YouTube videos. What if you could make a living by just writing labs? And then we believe in this, right? This entire ecosystem. So we're actually doing it. And so we're building a line of what we're calling scored challenge labs. So you take all these scenarios we talked about where, scenarios, for cloud, for virtual machines, for challenge-based access. You can't go to exercise 2 until exercise 3 until exercise 2 is completed. We believe this is the future of hands-on learning, and so we're building a series of hands-on learning experiences that leverage this technology in different ways. We're doing it for 2 reasons. Number 1, because we believe it's the future. Number 2 is that we want to know that we can do it, and we can do it easily, and we can do it well, because if we can, you can.
Exactly.
There's no point in producing a product you don't use. So we're going to put ourselves in the shoes of the author. We're going to start producing content that our customers can take as supplemental to what they already do, but also as an example of how to do things well, right? Of how to leverage these tools to build this best-of-breed content. And rising tide rises all the boats. We want to be the tide that makes hands-on learning better for everybody across the world. And so with that, thanks for attending.
Yes.
Right? We've got a lot of stuff we want to show you over the next 2 days. Tune in, tune out. You'll hear from Brian, you'll hear from myself, Kirk, Robert, and I left out James.
On purpose?
On purpose. And then particular shout out to Laura, who's in the background there somewhere.
She is.
Driving all the social media, driving all the scheduling, making sure that everything gets out. So again, these guys put a lot of work into this. It's incredible, incredible content they've produced. So tune in, ask questions, challenge us to make it better for you.
That's right.
And with that, thanks for joining us for this hour, and we'll be seeing you.
We'll see you soon.